few armies in history have a reputation as fearsome as those of the Mongol Empire. During the height of the empire, the Mongol horde carried a well-earned reputation for invincibility, inflicting devastation upon enemy armies and cities. So thorough was this carnage that many writers who experienced it firsthand could only describe it as a punishment sent by heaven, for how else could one explain how so many cities and armies fell so quickly? In our next series of videos, we will attempt to do just that, explaining various aspects of the medieval Mongol military and providing insights as to what made the horsemen of the Great Khan so successful. By the way, did you know that we have a whole podcast dedicated to the history of the Mongols? Because we do. And you can find the link to it in the description and the pinned comment. Our first episode will provide an overview of the evolution of the 13th century Mongolian military, offering a brief comparison to earlier and later steppe armies. The Mongols are of course most well known for their horse archers, the byproduct of their lifestyle. In the great grass seas of the Eurasian steppe, the Mongols and other nomads spent their entire lives on horseback, learning to ride before they could walk in order to manage their great herds of sheep, goat, oxen, camels and horses. A lifetime in the saddle in the often harsh conditions of Inner Asia left the nomads excellent riders with incredible endurance, able to endure hardships beyond that of sedentary peoples. Each Mongol learned to shoot and construct their bows and arrows from a young age, beginning with a child's bow to hunt marmots and small mammals, gradually increasing the strength of the bow until able to master the powerful composite recurve warbow. Highly mobile, deadly at range, and strategically swift compared to infantry armies, the horse archer, when used properly, could be the master of the medieval battlefield. Many aspects of the above description of nomadic life and warfare as mounted archers are easily recognizable to a scholar of earlier nomadic steppe peoples like the Xiongnu and Scythians. This Chinese description of the Xiongnu in the 2nd century BC is just as applicable to the Mongols well over 1,000 years later. The little boys start out by learning to ride sheep and shoot birds and rats with a bow and arrow, and when they get a little older, they shoot foxes and hares which are used for food. Thus, all the young men are able to use a bow and act as armed cavalry in time of war. It is their custom to herd their flocks in times of peace and make their living by hunting, but in periods of crisis, they take up arms and go off on plundering and marauding expeditions. This seems to be their inborn nature. For long-range weapons they use bows and arrows, and swords and spears at close range. If the battle is going well for them, they will advance, but if not, they will retreat, for they do not consider it a disgrace to run away. Their only concern is self-advantage, and they know nothing of propriety or righteousness. For these earlier peoples, many of the same basic tenets of mounted warfare were utilized by both them and the Mongols, such as hit-and-run tactics, envelopment, and the infamous feigned retreat. Contemporaries to these earlier peoples remark on their endurance and hardiness, their skill as horsemen, and the danger of their arrows. There are, however, several aspects in which the Mongol warrior found himself better equipped than his forebears, in the form of several technological advancements to their tack and weapons. The Scythians, for instance, had only soft padded saddles for their mounts. Essentially 2 leather pads held to the horse with a girth strap, it provided minimal shock absorption for the rider and little for him to maintain his place beyond his thighs. The Xiongnu and Huns were better supplied with the development of the treed saddle, a sturdy wooden frame cushioned for the rider. It was a more secure base for the archer to shoot from, which also made it more difficult to unhorse him. Leaning into the front of these saddles lifted them, allowing the hips to absorb more of the shocks from riding and reduce jostling from the horse's movement. What these early riders lacked, from the Xiongnu and Huns to the Parthians and the Romans, was the paired stirrup. When the stirrup emerged is a matter of controversy. The earliest stirrups were made of materials like wood which do not preserve well archaeologically. But it seems likely the stirrup, in a form easily recognizable today, was developed around the 3rd century AD in northern China or Mongolia, spreading west via Turkic tribes, arriving in Europe with the Avars by the 6th century. Stirrups provided several advantages. They provided a much more secure platform, allowing the rider to raise himself in the saddle for extra leverage and reach in close combat, or for the horse archer to stand and use his leg and core muscles to help draw heavier bows. Further, the knees could better absorb the jolts from the horse's movement and guide the horse in the heat of battle. Outside of combat, the benefits were more significant, particularly for the nomad. Needing to be on horseback all day while tending their herds, the stirrup helps take pressure off of the horse's back. A skilled rider on a strong horse could now travel further and longer. When coupled with multiple remounts, the distance horsemen could march rose dramatically. The famed weapon of the horse archer was their composite bows. Rather than a self-bow, such as the Welsh longbow, which is made from a single piece of wood, the composite bow was made from layers of wood, horn and sinew. The horn and sinew increased the strength of the bow, transferring more energy to the arrow. Most composite bows of the steppe world were also recurved, the ears of the bows storing yet more energy, while providing leverage to aid the archer. Whereas a self-bow's strength can only be increased by making the bow larger or the archer stronger, the recurve composite bow remains relatively short without sacrificing power. The shorter bow made it more maneuverable on horseback, allowing Mongol warriors to even travel with heavier and lighter bows on them as the situation required. The composite bow was however in danger of warping from prolonged exposure to humidity. Not an issue in the generally dry steppes of Central Asia, but in wetter climates dangerous to the bow's health. To offset this, bows of the Xiongnu and Huns had the ends of their limbs strengthened with bone plates to reduce warping, but this made the bow heavier and decreased arrow velocity. In contrast, Mongol bows of the conquest era lacked bone plates, transferring more energy to the arrows and granting them greater penetrative power and range, but making them more susceptible to climate changes, perhaps accounting in part for reduced Mongol military effectiveness in Southeast Asia and Europe. Despite some modern claims, the Mongol conquests were not a result of a technological innovation in horse archery, as the technology itself had changed little once these above-mentioned developments were completed by the 4th to 5th centuries AD. For that, we must look to the military leadership of the Mongols and their innovations upon existing steppe traditions. Many aspects of this we will explore in the next videos in this series. Beyond these technological changes, the Mongol army of the 13th century shared many traits with steppe armies of the preceding centuries. The method of organizing armies using the decimal system was present among the Xiongnu. The highest commanders led divisions nominally of 10,000, while the smallest were squads of just 10 men who operated together. Traditionally, this system was based within the tribe, but it was the innovation of Genghis Khan to largely break down the tribes of Mongolia and almost entirely replace them with the decimal system, removing minor chiefs and khans from power to ensure no alternatives to his rule. Earlier steppe confederations like the Xiongnu generally had an important imperial bodyguard and retinue, which often provided a number of the major leaders and generals of the empire. For the Mongols, this was originally the Nukud of Temujin, the basis for the famed Keshig, which he expanded upon when he took the title of Genghis Khan in 1206. The Keshig under the Mongols evolved beyond just bodyguards, but into a general staff, where top officers learned the ropes of command. From there they were appointed not only to lead armies, but to conquer and govern regions as the Mongol Empire expanded, and acted as important administrators. Sons of the royal families of subject kingdoms were taken into the Keshig as hostages to help secure the loyalty of their dynasty, but also to be essentially indoctrinated in Mongol imperial destiny, going through trials alongside the Mongols and amply rewarded. When they returned to their homelands, they were loyal servants of the Khan who helped to uphold his rule. While the following video will detail the matter of Mongolian military tactics more fully, The following example should prove illustrative of how Genghis Khan innovated upon and evolved, rather than invented, traditional nomadic lifestyle and tactics. All nomadic horsemen learned to hunt from a young age, a means to protect their herds from predators and provide extra sustenance for their families. It also provided an excellent means to practice for war. For the Khitans of the Liao dynasty and the Mongols, large-scale hunting expeditions served as training for unit operations. In an operation called Nege by the Mongols, an army of horsemen would form a rough circle, at times several days' journey in diameter, gradually tightening and driving all game before them into an arena, where the nobility would take their pick of the hunt before leaving the rest to the men. While simple on paper, organizing this properly took considerable skill. Given the size of the operation, a timetable was set for each group, operating in their military units, to reach their destination and begin to push the game forward. To prevent animals from escaping, the various units had to be in contact and be coordinating to prevent holes in the line, which would allow herds to slip through their grasp. Allowing animals to escape resulted in punishments. Following orders, meeting timetables, unit tactics, and discipline were the basic building blocks of Mongol successes, and what allowed their armies to outmaneuver their foes. While large-scale hunting expeditions were practiced across the Eurasian steppe, and its rules applied to warfare and battles, under the Mongols the Nege itself became a military strategy. Time and time again, a Nege was set over an entire region, designating a major city to be the meeting point. Mongol units would spread across the region, attacking small towns and villages, driving the rural populations towards the major city as the Nege tightened. Refugees fled into the city, not just overwhelming its resources and thus reducing the length of the siege it could withstand, but also sowing chaos and confusion, for the terrified population brought stories of Mongol atrocities and spread fear, increasing the chance the city would submit rather than face Mongol wrath. Mongol army structure will also be explored in an upcoming video, but to detail its evolution over the 13th century, we will give it a brief overview. At the founding of the Mongol Empire in 1206, perhaps the entirety of the Mongol army was lightly armoured horse archers, made up of the Mongolian and Turkic tribes who had submitted or been conquered up to that point. The Keshik may have had heavier armour, but were still armed with their powerful bows, closing with the enemy only once they had been weakened by arrows. Genghis Khan understood well the effectiveness of this force in the open field, but upon his first campaign against a sedentary society, that being the Tangut kingdom of Xixia in 1209, he found that unless he could draw the enemy from their walls through a feigned retreat or starve them out, that fortifications could prove impassable. With his invasion of the Jurchen Jin dynasty in 1211, a solution presented itself in the mass defections of Jin forces to his army. Not just Khitans, a Mongolic people who loathed the Jin and were themselves skilled horse archers, but also numerous Han Chinese, who provided the Mongols with infantry, crossbowmen, and numbers. More significant was the defection of Chinese catapult specialists and engineers, one of whom, Shur Talahai, defected to the Mongols early in the invasion and was rewarded handsomely for sharing his knowledge, teams, and experience. Further capture of Chinese engineers, stonemasons, and carpenters brought further knowledge of how to attack cities and build siege equipment. This adoption of warriors and knowledge of defectors, vassals, and captives proved perhaps the greatest deviation from earlier nomadic empires. In order to conquer not just the fringes of sedentary states, as per earlier nomadic empires, but the sedentary state itself, the Mongols required the manpower and knowledge of those sedentary societies. Each culture the Mongols encountered and conquered provided them new resources and tools for their arsenal. With the Mongols themselves remaining primarily light horse archers, they used northern Chinese and Iranian infantry and siege engineers, southern Chinese and Korean naval knowledge, Khitan, Jurchen and Turkic horse archers, Armenian and Georgian heavy cavalry, and more. Within a few years of the start of the Mongol conquests, the Mongol leadership and Mongol Turkic army corps of horse archers was supported by a large heterogeneous army. Able to pick the most effective tactics, weapons, armors and warriors from the cultures of Eurasia, the Mongolian army was thus able to adapt to a variety of situations, well beyond what earlier nomadic empires could accomplish. It was the job of subject peoples to fill the military roles the Mongols themselves either could not fill or had no interest in filling themselves. The poor Khwarezmian defense in 1220 can be explained in part as the Khwarezm Shah Muhammad anticipating pillaging horse archers and not a large disciplined army ably utilizing siege weapons and technology. The Mongols also showed themselves willing to use gunpowder weapons in their wars in China, a subject we will explore in a future video as well. The Mongol Empire fractured in the second half of the 13th century. Debate rages as to how the Mongolian military in each independent Khanate continued to develop, and to what extent they were influenced by local military tradition. Generally, the debate steers towards questioning if the Mongols converted to heavier forms of cavalry. The presence of true Mongolian heavy cavalry in the early years of the empire is not universally accepted, with it often said that the small Mongolian horse lacked the strength to carry heavy armor. In the Ilkhanid, scholars like A.P. Martinez have suggested the Mongols adopted medium or heavy cavalry to better contend with Mamluk forces, and artwork from the Ilkhanid shows a preponderance of heavily armored Mongolian forces. An aspect of this argument is that the Mongols even began to sedentarize in the Ilkhanate, abandoning nomadism altogether, while their horses mixed with larger Persian breeds in order to carry the greater weight of armor, but making them less suited to the open steppe. Other scholars, such as Reuven Amitai, have found the argument unconvincing, suggesting that it remained the job of oft-mentioned Armenian and Georgian vassals to act as heavy cavalry, while the Mongols themselves continued as light horse archers. Similar arguments have been put forth for the Mongols within the Yuan dynasty, where it has been suggested that Mongol troops adorned heavier armor taken from stores of the fallen Song dynasty. In the territories of the Golden Horde and Chagatai Khanate, where Turkic influence and access to the steppes was greatest, there can be no doubt in the continued predominance of light horse archers. By the latter half of the 14th century, it was lightly armoured Chagatai horse archers which Timur led to begin his conquests. Much like Genghis Khan, Timur incorporated outsiders into his army to utilize their skills and knowledge, overcoming the deficiencies that came from an army entirely of horse archers. Despite a growth in the percentage of heavy cavalry in Central Asia, in the steppe, heavy armor remained difficult and expensive to manufacture and maintain, especially for the average nomad. The vast majority of post-Mongol successor states, from the northern Yuan, the Timurids, the Kazakhs to the Crimean Khanate, saw their warriors continue to fight in a fashion recognizable not just to the Mongols of the 13th century, but to the Gurk Turks of the 7th century, the Huns of the 4th century, to the Xiongnu and even the Scythians. The Mongol conquests were not a result of a sudden transformation in the technology and lifestyle of nomadism, but of skilled leadership, innovating upon existing customs and taking advantage of the tools of both nomadic and sedentary cultures. This is what allowed the Mongols to expand far beyond the scope of earlier nomadic empires, and what we will explore in our coming videos in this series. So make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters and channel members who make the creation of our videos possible. Now you can also support us by buying our merchandise via the link in the description. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.